It is so good to see so many of our neighbors here for today's meeting. I think this is probably the biggest meeting we've had since pre-COVID that didn't involve food, alcohol, or golf clubs. So thank you for attending. We're going to talk about a very important topic that's dear to all of you. Before I get into it, let me introduce myself. My name is Ron Riel, and I'm the facilitator for today. And my job is to make sure it flows perfectly, take care of the problems like technology, and also introduce our guests. And you can see we have 6 people who are here to give us some information. Before we go any further, you probably are wondering why. Why are we here? Why this meeting? Why now? And I'll answer that with a little quiz. Not the dreaded pop quiz that we had in school, but just a simple raise your hand quiz. So first of all, I'd like you to raise your hand if any of you attended our last Firewise community meeting, which was in January of 2020. Raise your hand. Okay, so not quite half. One of the reasons that we have this meeting is to let you know that we actually have been very busy since then. It may have gone unnoticed. You might have heard stories to the contrary, but Firewise has been very busy, and John Sharp is going to tell us about some of the things that have been going on and that will continue to go on. The second question is, how many of you have moved to the community after September 9th, 2020? So relatively new, raise your hand. September 9th, 2020, if you moved here after that. Okay, so a good number of you. Now we're here to tell you that there is a program to help us protect from that dreaded wildfire. Because September 9th was that day that those of us living here received messages that said, get ready to pack your bags. There's a fire not too far away from here, and it could be here. And that was really a shock to the system for all of us, because even though we moved here, we know that we were in the forest. We know what a forest can do. We know that there's challenges of forest fires. The fact that it was that close and that we almost needed to evacuate told us that we really need to be doing something, and we have been. So Firewise is established to help us protect ourselves. The next question is, if I say the word Smokey, what is the response? Smokey the Bear, right? Actually, I discovered on a trip to New Mexico that it's not Smokey the Bear. He was not given a middle name. I was on a tour, and there was a sign of Smokey, and I shouted out on the bus, hey, that's Smokey the Bear, and the person leading said, Ron, there is no the, it's Smokey. But I asked why was it spelled without an E, and they said, well, here in New Mexico, they don't spell words properly. So just like some whiskeys aren't spelled with E, Smokey sometimes is spelled without that. But and the last question is, what is Smokey's motto? What does he say to us? Right. So we'll leave it to Jerry. He's the only one that needs to do that, so the rest of us can go home. If we were like the rest of society, that's what would happen. But the reality is we, everyone in this room, everyone who lives here, we can help prevent wildfires. And that's what today's session is about. So I'll introduce our panelists just by name, and they can raise their hand, and then later on I'll do a little more introduction. So we have as our guest today, Eleanor Trenary. Eleanor, she is the outreach representative for Representative Kim Schrier. We also have Alan Levovitz. Alan? And Alan is filling in for Hillary Franz. Did I pronounce that name right, Franz? All right, excellent. And then we have East Pierce Fire and Rescue Deputy Chief Bill Mack. Bill? And then we also have John Parkinson, East Pierce County Fire and Rescue Chief. Thank you for being here. We also have Dina Sutherland. Welcome, Dina. And Judy Hurley. Excellent. And then finally, let's see, did I miss anybody? I think that's everybody's there. So again, we're going to hear some comments from each of them. But before we go any further, let's just find out where we are and where we have been. And to do that, do an excellent job of that, is our own resident expert, John Sharp. John?
Thank you. 7 days ago, I had knee surgery, so I might sit, I might stand. I don't know for sure. I was trying not to pass out. First of all, I need to recognize the people that have helped get Firewise really get down in the trenches. We got Gary Sains in the back, we got Roger Hemrod, we got Tom Shepard, we got Kevin Shields, who's off on vacation. Gail Lavelle is joining in on the trenches. Who am I missing? I got Roger. Pam Small. The list is long, and what? Jerry Hendershot. We like to pick on firemen to do this. You know, it kind of all goes together. Anyway, without these guys, we wouldn't be here today. There's been countless hours put in, and there's a lot of work that has been done, and there's a lot of work still to be done. So, first of all, I want to thank you all for showing up. A lot of new faces. I like the fact that there's a lot of people moved in since our last big meeting. And one of the biggest challenges that Firewise has right now is you go to the Firewise website nationally, it'll tell you that you could build a defensible area around your home. And that defensible area, you got a small zone, you got a larger zone, it gets bigger. By law, you can't go off your property to establish these zones, because if I live next to Eleanor and she's got a wood fence that's 10 feet from my house, I can't go tear her fence down because it's going to help catch my house on fire. And it's just, you know, you got to stay on your own property. The biggest concern that most people have out here is the property behind the homes. The property's all in the green areas that you'll see. And on this map, the area is in blue. All of that property is owned by the Tehaleh Owners Association, or TOA. And we are not allowed to do anything on it. We're not allowed to go out there. We're not allowed to cut trees or remove trees or do any work because it's not our property. But after numerous houndings and talking and negotiating and stuff, the developer has come around and said, okay, we might let you do some of this stuff that you want to do, you know, to help alleviate some of the concerns of the citizens, because we sit in our house and we look out in the back door, a tree fell down, it lays there with the branches up in the air, and it's all scary. So the history is that in June of 2019, I'm not used to saying 19 anymore, are we? Unless we're verifying date of birth. Tehaleh was originally established as Cascadia in 1998. And during that establishment, there's like 700 pages of environmental impact statement. And in that document, it set up the guidelines on how all the blue areas are to be managed. And so the thought back then in 1998 was, if a tree falls over, just leave it, it'll rot, and it'll become a nurse log someday. And it'll be good for the forest. Well, forest management has changed, as our guest hopefully will give you a little insight on that too. So the area's not ours, it's owned by Tehaleh. Tehaleh says, no, you can't go back there, but now they're starting to say, okay, we'll work with you guys. You know, they're realizing that we're not going to go away. We want to try to help the community. And so they're starting to allow some work to take place. This area here is in Mount Baker. I don't know how many people know the mountain names, but this is in the Mount Baker neighborhood. And I call it Track Y Goat Project. On the legal plats, it's Tract Y. The Goat Project is because in 2019, TOA paid a bunch of money, close to 10 grand, to bring in a bunch of goats and clear the property, because it was not reforested properly and it all gone to blackberries and invasive plants. The theory was, bring the goats back 12 months later. As they eat the seeds, they supposedly sterilize the seeds and the blackberries will magically go away. Well, it didn't work. First photo on top is after the goats were finished. The two photos below are about 17 months later. The goats didn't come back because they didn't want to attract crowds of people during COVID. So they let everything grow back. So at my begging and roping in Gary and the gang, we got the old goats to go clear out the project. And we gave ourselves, I think, 5 weeks to get this done when we put together a program, submitted it to TOA and says, hey, we want to come back and clear this property. We'll haul out all the stuff, we'll get it all out of there, and then we're going to ask permission for the homeowners adjacent to that property to be allowed to plant native plants back there. And native shrubs within 15 feet, native trees within 25 feet. Maintain it, and then we're asking you to come back and replant the rest of the hillside and get it reforested properly to keep the invasives out. They said yes, and we're like, wow. They said yes. This means a lot of work. So 2 days, 35 volunteers, somewhere in that neighborhood, we cleaned it to the ground. The photos on the left are approximate same locations as the photos on the right. That was after 2 days worth of work out there. So it was an amazing project, and the photos on the top are today, the photos on the bottom are before we started. You can see on the right there's a log up in the one photo, and you can't even see it because of all the debris in the other photo. So after all the work was done, just this past month, Firewise accepted donations throughout the community, and we purchased over 200 plants, shrubs and trees, to give to the homeowners and help them plant them behind their homes so that they could reforest the area behind their home. Now these homeowners are now allowed, the planting's all been done, all the plants are in the ground, they're all native, that was one of the keys, and now these homeowners will be allowed to maintain that area. Maintain doesn't mean they can turn it into a rose garden. Maintain means they can cut a circle around the new shrubs, they can nurture those shrubs till they grow and help them become a natural forest. So we did make some progress. Here's some photos of work afterwards. The top right is a gentleman that was planting behind his home. He's still got his mulch bags out. He did a really good job, because you guys have never found a rock while digging in your yard, have you? Okay, just checking to see if I was the only one. So anyway, this is the end of the planting at this point. The planting has been done. So we have other projects. We have projects in our mind that we would like to see done. We have grandiose ideas of someday, through grants and whatnot, being allowed to hire contractors to come in and help remove down trees and actually get the big brush piles removed that have been left behind. So we'll think about the future projects while you're listening to our panelists, and then at the end we'll give you a couple of ideas of things we're thinking about, and then we'd take questions from the audience on what you got, questions for them, or if you have projects that you'd like to bring up to look at. One of the things I've found is that people only recommend projects near where they live. Don't know why.
Thank you, John. All right, hopefully you got from that is that as much as we'd like to shape our green areas, that we are subject to restrictions. So to sum it up, we're making progress little by little, negotiation by negotiation, in order to be able to impact it. However, again, the goal of Firewise is that we as a community work together to help keep wildfires at bay. Let's see. We will start with our, I guess for lack of a better term, our keynote presenter, who is Alan Levovitz. He's going to provide us an overview of the 2021 fire year, discuss expectations for our future wildlife situation, and of course the need for preparedness, and to let us know some information that it'd be important that we know. So let's welcome Alan.
Thank you. I think I will be able to do this without reading glasses. My arms are finally long enough. So good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I really appreciate it, to be able to speak with you on behalf of Commissioner of Public Lands, Hillary France. And as I was introduced, first I'd like to talk a little bit about the 2021 fire season, share a little bit of info about that. And I have to say, it's on a day like today, nice cool fall day, it's a real relief after the fire season that we had. It was an intense one, as I can see the nodding heads understand. So, I mean, to start with, conditions were dire right from the start. Even though we had a good snowpack this year, our forests and rangelands became bone dry in eastern Washington in the early spring. The period actually from January through April in eastern Washington ranks in the top 10% driest springs on record, so since 1894. So that gives you a flavor of just how dry it was. Western Washington started catching up, and by July it was pretty dry as well. And then, as probably we all remember, we had that just record-shattering heat wave that occurred in July that further exacerbated what was already a really, really serious situation for wildfire. So as a result of extreme fire conditions across much of the West, natural and regional preparedness levels remain at their maximum level of 5 for months. And it became increasingly difficult to be able to get resources here in Washington State, since we all collaborate across the country to share these resources. However, with the predictive services that we have going into this fire year, we knew what we were likely facing this summer. So our predictive services have gotten quite good, and we could see it coming. And because of that, we took the unprecedented step of securing far more air resources than we ever had before. Because of that early investment in an expanded air fleet, a tactical focus change on initial attack in particular, and then, as usual, the tireless work of thousands of firefighters that put their lives on the line every day and work harder than any other people I get to work with. I can report that this year was largely one of success in the face of extreme fire conditions and fire behavior, and which had the potential to be absolutely disastrous and deadly. So to put that in context, as of October 1st, we're still not quite done with our fire year, by the way. In fact, we just had a pretty significant fire in Chelan. But as of October 1st, there have been 1,187 fires on DNR protected lands across the state. And that's as compared to 964 fires last year in 2020. So that's a pretty significant increase. What I can say, though, is that more than 98% of those fires were caught during the initial attack. So that's when they were first detected and we dispatched resources to get them. We caught 98%, which is over 1,100 fires that were stopped at that initial point. And that's a key, I think, to our strategy for how to deal with fires going forward. Of that, more than 93% of these fires were stopped at 10 acres or less. So they were kept small. That's also obviously very important. The thing to keep in mind is that any one of these fires, if we had not been able to catch them, could have easily become the next Sumner Grade fire, or could have become the Cold Springs fire that we experienced last year. So we believe that this year offers us a good test of a blueprint that we're currently drawing for effectively taking on this growing threat of extreme wildfires that we're seeing. Still, across all the jurisdictions in Washington, there were over 1,800 fires that burned some 650,000 acres. That's a sobering number. That's a lot of fire on the ground. But remembering last year, and in particular last Labor Day, where over 500,000 acres burned in less than 36 hours. 500,000 acres in 36 hours across the state. We realized that this year could have been much, much worse. So it gives us a belief that the blueprint, like I said, that we are currently building has some legs to it. So like I said, thanks to primarily the tireless work of many, many, many firefighters, good preparedness, and a years-long effort to increase our funding to be able to provide those suppression resources. I can stand here today and say that we were able to overcome an especially challenging wildfire year. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about something that you guys have particular insight in. As members of Bonnie Lake and as was introduced here, I expect that many of you have some vivid memories of last year's Sumner Grade fire, which burned nearly 500 acres in western Washington, which is really pretty remarkable. It also destroyed 2 homes and 6 other buildings. And it caused the evacuation of thousands of people in this community. That, for me, seems somewhat unprecedented. So after the downed power lines ignited this fire, conditions until rarely seen in this area resulted in extreme fire behavior and rapid growth. The fire ultimately jumped 410 toward the Sumner View housing development and destroyed the two homes that it destroyed there. But thanks to East Pierce County Fire and Rescue, they were able to respond quickly and extremely effectively and hold this line between the fire and the rest of the community, undoubtedly saving hundreds of homes. So over the first 48 hours of the fire, too, resources were extremely thin, and that was due to all of the fires that were occurring all over the state, all over the region, actually, all up and down the coast, all over the west. And because of that, East Pierce County Fire and Rescue had to hold the fire line essentially on their own, which was quite a monumental task. We were able to provide, DNR and the National Guard were able to provide air resources to assist with that we feel is a vital part of how we address initial attack. And then finally, hours or days later, we were able to add personnel with a strike team to help them fully contain the fire and start really controlling that fire line. So the demand for firefighting resources and inability to attain them across the region last year, and then again this year, has highlighted how reliant we are on others, and then importantly, how vulnerable that actually makes us. This year, a combination of preparedness, more resources, new tactics, and frankly, luck helped us prevent the level of destruction that we experienced last year. And luck is not a strategy, and it's not something that we want to depend on. So the experiences we've had with wildfire in the past decade, reinforced by what happened last year, have demonstrated that we need to come together to make proactive investments needed to strengthen our wildfire response, but it's also made it clear that we need to get ahead of the problem. We need to invest in now restoring the health of our forests and to make them more resilient to wildfire. We also recognize that we must invest in our communities impacted by fire, assessing their needs and addressing them quickly to prevent further destruction and speed up recovery after a fire. Further, we understand that prevention of fire is absolutely critical and is possible with the unity and commitment that we're talking about. Fighting wildfire is a team effort, and building partnerships in local communities with local communities to make them more resilient to wildfire provides us with the strongest line of defense. So with this understanding that I'm happy to say is shared across the leadership of this state, DNR was able to work with a bipartisan group of your legislators to pass House Bill 1168 during this year's legislative session. And if you haven't heard about 1168, I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you. This bill commits a $500 million investment to wildfire response, restoring forest health, so getting at the problem, and building community resiliency. So this is a historic moment for our state, and it's nothing less than a game changer. So by proactively addressing the forest health and wildfire crisis we face, we can actually get ahead of this problem, and that's probably the first time we've ever really thought we were able to say that. With this commitment, we're making transformative improvements in our capacity to respond to fire, while also dramatically increasing our ability to restore forest resiliency to change the trajectory that we're currently headed on. By next fire season, this is where the rubber meets the road, we'll have hired over 100 new firefighters, taken delivery of 2 new fire suppression aircraft, added more aircraft under contract to support DNR's efforts, but also the efforts of partners specifically. We will build strike teams of dozers and excavators for rapid initial attack, something that we've never had access to, but rely on heavily on pretty much every fire. But then also to have them available to help with what happens after a fire and repairing the damages that occur. And then added to that, we'll be adding many new staff to support the delivery of preparedness, response, and recovery. We will also have dramatically accelerated our implementation of forest health and work like, for example, prescribed burning, mechanical thinning of young stands, and commercial harvest and older overstock stands that will make our forests more resilient and resistant to fire and improve overall forest health. So the need to restore a more natural fire regime in our forests with prescribed fire has never been greater. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And this gets at the questions about leaving down logs and what their role is, and about other ecosystem benefits that forests provide. So we're working to undo the impacts over 100 years of overly aggressive fire suppression. That's the reality of it, that has contributed to leaving our forests stocked with a century's worth of fuel buildup. Once mechanical treatments have been completed, the use of controlled fire is key to maintaining a healthy and resilient forest. There are also, frankly, too many acres of young, dangerously overstocked, and unhealthy forests to restore them all without the use of prescribed fire. In addition, we will be deploying a new program to support the building of community resiliency. It will provide increased technical assistance, grants, and then crews and equipment to help with fuel reduction work, like the work that you're talking about. We've also already begun increasing our investments in local fire districts because improving community preparedness strengthens our first line of defense against fire. So reinforcements are on the way, but this isn't going to happen overnight. It took us over 100 years for Washington to get into this state, so it's going to take us years to get out of it. And the commitment to achieving improved wildfire response, forest health, and community resilience is one that needs to be sustained and addressed at a scale of the ongoing nature of the problem that we face. Let me stress, needs to be sustained. This can't be a one-off effort, just like what you're engaged with. We realize that the threat of large and devastating fire is only going to grow in the foreseeable future. That's the unfortunate reality of what we're facing. But because of the commitment made by the legislature with House Bill 1168, we're going to make real and tangible progress today. So finally, I wanted to comment on what you all are doing and community partnership. So I want to emphasize the importance of community partnerships and making an individual commitment to addressing our wildfire crisis. Strengthening our fire suppression capabilities and increasing our efforts to restore forest health and resiliency is only part of what it takes to keep a community safe. The reality of the situation we are in is that firefighters can't stop every fire. We can't protect every home or save every community every time. That's just the reality of the situation with the types of fires that we have on the landscape today. The condition of our wildlands, the increasing occurrence of extreme fire behavior, and the expansions of communities into their wildland interface means that we must build that capacity within our communities, like yours. Capacity to take action to reduce wildfire fuels in their neighborhoods, harden their homes to fire, and increase their preparedness to take the necessary steps to stay safe when there is a fire. So I want to recognize you all in this community for stepping up to respond to this need and to beginning to take the proactive steps necessary to ensure that your homes, your families, and your neighborhoods are safe from wildfire. You've demonstrated great insight in recognizing that fire is a serious threat to this community like yours, this community I should say, and making the commitment to become Firewise. As you know, becoming Firewise takes a collaborative approach to fire protection, requiring the entire community to work together to make their neighborhood resilient to wildfire. And we see a great example of that collaborative effort here today with you. The Firewise program has many challenging goals, including education about fire, how to create safe landscapes, and how to plan for an emergency. All of these challenges are met by residents like you and cooperators volunteering their time. The work you're starting won't be easy, as we saw from the old goats. And like the way we are transforming how the DNR is addressing the wildfire crisis, it requires a long-term commitment. But this is a long-term investment in your community, and it's worth it. We've seen how it pays off for communities like yours all across the state already. So in closing, I'd like to say that a community like yours is also leading by example and serves as a model of what our communities must do to address the wildfire crisis. This is invaluable to serve as that model. And I and the Commissioner truly appreciate your commitment to partnering with Firewise to create a safe community and be a role model for all of Washington State. So thank you for your commitment and the opportunity to address you. I really appreciate it.
So hi everybody, I'm John Parkinson. I'm the fire chief with East Pierce Fire and Rescue. I've had the opportunity to talk with a number of you at a couple we had a press conference behind our station during last summer or earlier this summer. With COVID, I honestly got to admit I'm not sure which year we're in anymore. 2020 seems to have disappeared. So if I refer to years wrong, please excuse me in advance. So, and then we also had a community meeting out here in the park towards the end of the summer as well. So, so some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today will be repetitive for some of you and hopefully new information for some of you who haven't attended some of those other meetings. So I'll give you another quiz here. So since Sumner Grade Fire, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, anybody want to guess how many community groups have reached out to talk about wildland fire preparedness? All right, everybody's wrong. The answer, well, I take that back. Somebody did say one, and that is correct because this is actually the only group. So kudos to all of you for being proactive in that. That is a big deal. So a little bit about East Pierce Fire and Rescue. For those of you that don't know who we are, I always got to do the shameless plug so that you know who your fire department is. So East Pierce Fire and Rescue covers quite a big area, 153 square miles. So all the way up to the border of Fife and Tacoma, we cover Milton and Edgewood, the city of Sumner, the city of Bonnie Lake, the town of South Prairie, all of the area around Lake Tapps, all of the Prairie Ridge communities, all the way out through Tehaleh, the town of South Prairie, all the way out to the border of Buckley. We do not cover Buckley, that's its own fire department. We partner with them, but different fire department. All the way out towards Wilkeson, past Carbonado, all the way up to the border of the national park. So 153 square miles, 100,000 residents in that area. And we run just over 12,000 911 calls a year. And what that equates to is about 25,000 times an emergency unit is going down the road from East Pierce. So I just say that so that you understand that we're covering a big area, and as you know, Tehaleh is one of those areas that's up and coming. By the time it finishes, we expect to have about 25,000 residents out here, and we're seeing not the same level of growth, but quite a bit of growth throughout our entire district. So we're always challenged with dealing with the challenges that come along with growth, and how do you pay to meet the demands of the community. So backing up, Alan talked about the Sumner Grade Fire. So again, just a recap of that for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So Labor Day weekend last year, if you remember the end of the summer, we had a pretty dry summer. Smoke started to roll in over the weekend. It was pretty hot. We rolled into what we call red flag conditions, and so that's extremely low humidity, below 20%. We had high temperatures, and then we also had something that's unique to our area, which is a strong east wind event. So east winds, if you're familiar with Southern California, they get the Santa Anas, which the wind blows out of the east. So we get the east winds up here, and that is typically where we really start to get worried when we hear red flag warnings and we have a strong east wind event coming, which is what happened that evening. So, and even before the Sumner Grade Fire started, we ended up with a very large fire down on 167, a 3-alarm brush fire that was threatening commercial structures. After that started, we had another fire up in Milton, which we only were able to send one unit to. Everybody else that helped fight that fire came from City of Tacoma and South King Fire and Rescue out of Federal Way. So we were already pretty busy. We were running basically a 3-alarm fire down on 167, and a 3-alarm fire is something that might happen once every few years for us. It might happen once every decade for us, so that's pretty rare. So about just after midnight, the winds really started picking up. We started to have multiple incidents where we had down power lines throughout the district that we were trying to handle. We were in a resource emergency, which basically at that point our dispatch center stops dispatching emergency calls, and they send them to us via a fax machine of all things. And we handle the real low-level emergencies. So if somebody calls and says, I've got a tree that's across a power line, if it's not threatening a house or if nobody's hurt, we handle that in the next day or two. And we focus our resources on the immediate threats. So Sumner grade started, like Alan said, we had a tree go into a power lines. Power lines dropped on some grasses down below. Strong east winds actually pushed it the opposite of what fire normally does. It pushed it downhill instead of uphill, and it kept going down towards Sumner. Within about 5 or 6 hours, let me back up those 5 or 6 hours. Within about a half hour, we requested a second alarm, so that basically doubled the amount of resources that we had. It took us to about 30 firefighters on scene. And then the on-scene incident commander asked for a third alarm, and the answer back from dispatch was we're out of resources. And I say that to point out something that's real key here. We know that the Sumner grade fire, at least in recent history, was the largest wildfire that we've had in western Washington in an urban or suburban settings. There's been some larger fires out towards Crystal Mountain, for instance, with the Norse Peak fire, but really no homes threatened for that. But when you have a fire, the conditions that can make the fire that bad here, realize the fire conditions throughout the state and the Northwest are also going to be really bad, and everybody else is going to be dealing with the same or worse. And so our resource availability becomes very limited. So, as Alan said, we spent about the next 48 hours on our own with just those initial resources. As the fire grew, we went to what was called a state mobilization, which is requesting emergency help from the state. That gets our DNR assets coming to us, releases some funding. It takes the bill off the local taxpayers effectively and spreads it out across the state. So thankfully by, I want to say it was 6:30 in the morning, somewhere in there, the state did approve our request for a state mobilization. So we thought, great, we're in good hands. The troops are going to roll in. And they said, by the way, we can send you nobody. And again, they were inundated. If you recall last year what was going on throughout the Northwest, especially Oregon and Washington, things were in pretty rough shape. So we ended up about 24 hours into the fire getting one person, so part of their overhead team. So we had a commander that came in to help us start building out our incident command structure a little bit more in depth. And by the next morning, we had a couple more people, but that was it for about the next 24 to 48 hours before we finally started getting some additional resources in the form of additional bodies. So around 18 hours into the initial incident, it started just after midnight. By late afternoon that same day, in our minds it ends up kind of being 2 separate days because it feels like it started the day before. But by the end of that same day, the fire ended up jumping across 410 to the south. And it, as Alan said, burnt a couple homes up in the Sumner View neighborhood. And we'll talk about some of the prevention techniques in there. But here's the upside to this is that while we ended up losing 500 acres of forested area, we evacuated over 7,000 residents, we lost 2 homes. Our worst injury was one firefighter who cut their hand on some barbed wire. No lives lost. Not aware of any animals or livestock lost in there. So, all that stuff, at least the good news is replaceable. And your fire department got a heck of a experience and knows a whole lot more than we used to. And I say that joking, but if we flash forward to this year, we ended up with 2 pretty decent-sized fires just outside Tehaleh, just outside your main entrance here. We had a 10-acre fire in late July, early August, and then a couple weeks later, we had one just to the south, which was around that same size. I will tell you that prior to Sumner grade, those would have been hugely impactful. A 10-acre fire on this side of the Cascades is just very rare. we typically would fight a fire that's less than an acre in size. It's just, we don't see anything that size. So these 10-acre fires, actually, they were about 1 day of work for us. Due to a lot of changes from DNR, the amount of resources they were able to provide us, I'm sure both times you heard helicopters flying overhead dumping water. We wouldn't have got resources that quick in the past. So my hat's off to DNR for having those resources, plus personnel and the ability to, within about 12 to 24 hours, say, we'll take over the incident for you because of where it lands as far as, who funds it and whatnot. Again, that's something that in the past we would have stayed on those incidents, and I think both of those, they stayed on for around a week or so as they finished all the mop up of the fire and actually ensured that it was out. So, yes, sir. So those they were investigated by DNR. I don't have a final investigation report on them. If I was going to say what's my best guess is that they're going to come back as undetermined. Meaning for it to be something else, they've got to have some more hard evidence as far as what caused it. I think in both cases, there's things you can rule out as far as there weren't power lines nearby. We didn't have a strong wind event or anything else. So, there's some other causes in there that could be human and whether those were intentional or not. But at the end of the day, what I know at this point is that they ended up being, to the best of my understanding, is that they'd be undetermined as far as what the cause is. So that hit a little bit just on background of what we're talking about here. And I know with those recent fires just outside the entrance here, that's obviously of concern to you as residents. So a little bit more about East Pierce Fire and Rescue as far as what you have as far as staffing. When we hit some questions at the end, I can talk a little bit more about what the future of the community looks like as far as fire service. But total employees, we have around 173 right now, total employees. As far as what you see out on the street day to day, we staff a minimum of 27 firefighters every day. So they work on 3 shifts. We rotate them through. In addition to that, we have to have a whole overhead team to manage training and our emergency medical systems and make sure everybody gets paychecks and that HR is behaving appropriately, all that kind of stuff. So we're just like our own little city as far as how we have to operate and the number of staff. So 27 people, that's out of 6 stations. So we've got 6 fire engines that are staffed each day, and we have 4 medic units that are staffed each day. So that's what your daily staffing looks like. So I talked about red flag warnings and what that means. So we also do some, as we start to enter the summer, we really start to pay attention to weather. And I won't lie to you, especially after summer grade, we really pay attention to the weather. So if you looked at this last year, what we'll do is we'll add additional staffing. We'll typically add another engine, and we'll add what we call a brush truck. And a brush truck basically is something like a big 1.5-ton truck with a water tank and a lot of small hose in it that we use for fighting brush fires, something that can go off-road and get deep into the forest where a fire engine can't reach. So we'll staff up those couple units. If we hit true red flag warnings, which we did a handful of times over this summer, we started partnering with Buckley Fire Department, Ording, as well as Ashford Elby to pre-deploy units. And so what we ended up with this year was we had around 5 or 6 units that were staffed out of the South Prairie Fire Station. That was the best central location that we could get everybody. But we had them there ahead of time so that if we had an incident when the conditions were ripe, they could get on scene much quicker than if they were coming from, if you know where Ashford and Elby, that's probably a good hour for them to travel here. So we put the resources as central as we could without having to tie up an existing fire station and their staffing. So as far as resources go, that's what we have. Like I said, at the state and federal level, then our next step typically is that we ask DNR for resources. Like I said, what we saw in 2021 was substantially different than we would have seen in any year in the past as far as the level of support that they gave us. And then federal assets would come in from U.S. Forest Service. Not something we typically see locally, but they are assets that can be deployed eventually if we get that large of a scale of fire. So moving forward, the next couple of things that we're going to end up talking about really are in prevention and what you can do during a wildfire. So I'm just going to talk about some prevention techniques. Deputy Chief Mack will end up talking about evacuation and how to be prepared for that. And Dina, who's our public educator, is going to talk about how you get reliable information. Yes, ma'am.
All the fire hydrants that are around, who cleans them, takes all the foliage?
The fire hydrants themselves are managed by the individual water purveyor. So if it's a city of Bonnie Lake or Tacoma, whatever that is, it's their responsibility to maintain. It's not us, yeah. Yep. Yep. And if we get reports of that, we can certainly pass it along. But yeah, believe it or not, water purveyors get very protective of their equipment. Yeah. Yep. 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 So real quick, and you heard a couple other people talk about defensible space, that term as far as clearing area around your yard, and I'm not remiss to understand that your yards might not fit this really well. I know John mentioned the idea of going out 100 feet and realizing that's going to put you back in a green belt, or you're going to be in your neighbor's living room or something like that if we're talking about this. So understand you have to tailor some of these principles to you. But some simple things to do. Most of us out here, you're going to end up with needles and debris in your gutters. Keep those clean. So I'm not recommending anybody climb up on their roof. I'm hesitant to even go up on my roof anymore. Have somebody else come out and clean them, or get some sort of system that keeps needles out in the first place. So Sumner Grade, we lost 2 houses on the south side of 410. Originally I said we had an east wind event, so the wind was blowing from the east. Midway through that day, the fire did a shift and it started blowing extremely hard out of the north and started pushing the fire in a completely different direction. Well, the fire didn't burn 410. Embers flew across and started igniting things on the other side. If you've got gutters that have a bunch of dry needles in them, you can guess what's going to catch on fire. All of those homes in that neighborhood, and I shouldn't say all, most of the homes in that neighborhood ended up with damage that we didn't realize until days after. They never caught on fire, but what they ended up with was damage in their attic and in their crawl space, because as those embers blew, they ended up finding little points of entry into those spaces. So everything that you can do, as well as covering those attic vents and your foundation vents, and those, you all have newer homes, that should all be in place, but it's something worth checking each year to make sure that they're clear. Dead vegetation, making sure that you don't have anything that's dead near your house, so around 10 feet from your house, if you've got dead bushes or dead tall grass, that's cleared out. I understand your HOA rules probably require you to have a much cleaner yard than some communities, but something that's very important. Pruning trees up that are near your house so that you can walk underneath them. We say 6 to 10 feet. Simple way is if you can walk underneath your tree, that's appropriate. What we're trying to get away from is any fire that's on the ground. So if it's burning the grass, it doesn't have something to travel up and continue burning. So next one would be removing any combustibles. So if you had piles of lumber that you had done a project building a deck, or you had firewood that was stacked near your house, move it somewhere else, get it 30 feet more towards the outside of your property if you can, or into a shed. Keep your lawn mowed short, and if you can, water it. Understand that some areas encourage their residents not to, and that's fine. Again, so long as you keep your lawn mowed short, we're just trying to decrease the spread of fire. I talked about covering attic and foundation vents. And the last one in here, and Dina, did you bring any of the wazoo handouts? So the other one is to look at different types of plants and shrubs that you can put around your house. I'm not going to spend talking about the names of them because I don't know what they are. But we do have a good handout that came from Washington State University about firewise gardening and plants that you can put. There's, what your landscaper put in when they built your house probably may not be the best at defending from fire or stopping fire from spreading in the first place, but there are a lot of plants that you can put out that can limit fire spread. So just some simple overviews, and I know that one's some quick answers. We've got information that'll be set out. We've got information on our website, so we can point you in the right direction if you need more answered from that. That's all that I have. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Bill Mack, who's going to talk about how to evacuate. And the rule is if you see him running that you're supposed to follow him. So.
Thanks, Chief. I'm Bill Mack, Deputy Chief of East Pierce Fire and Rescue, and I guess the running joke is I'm new to this department, East Pierce, but I'm not new to the community. I built a home and raised a family down off 198th, one of the developments that were here before any of this was here. I said at one of my meetings that I rode dirt bikes and quads all through this area and did stuff you probably don't want to know about when I was younger. So the running joke at one of the meetings, I said, because I'm going to talk about evacuations, that if you see me leave, then everyone should start leaving too. No, but what I want you to do real quick is take your right hand and put it behind the person to your side. There's a method to my madness. Now I want you to gently pat that person on the back. Now take your other hand and reach to the person that just patted you on the back and pat them on the back. 2 reasons I'm doing that. One is because I know that none of us can tap ourselves on the back anymore. But I really want you guys to thank yourselves because this is a big deal. I mean, it really is a big deal to come out here and listen to us talk about Firewise on this one of our last sunny days of the year, right? To be here to talk about this. And I want to just commend this group for having the excitement and the want and the need and recognizing the need of being Firewise as a community. And I know East Pierce, we've been here several times talking to several groups. In smaller groups, we've been talking to the Turk group, we've been talking about communications and evacuations and all of that. So we really want to thank you for having the ability to have us come out or having us come out and talk about it, because communication about this is worth 10 times more than it ever is about really being prepared. Because like Chief said, there's 27 firefighters sitting on duty right now waiting for something to happen. And if you look at this room of about 80 of us, there's a lot more people in this room who are being Firewise and are going to be able to be of assistance to us. I mean, this really is like the old multi-level marketing days. We're the first ones, right? That if we can get you guys to help us, exponentially we're stronger as a department, we're stronger as a community. So I want to thank you for that. So really I want to talk about evacuation first. That there's different levels of evacuation, and in all my meetings I've talked to people, we've really had some confusion on what it means, right? So level 1 really is that just that ready period. When you hear of a level 1 evacuation, I want you to start thinking, hey, is there something that I need to start paying attention to? One thing that you really probably start needing to pay attention to would be the media, right? However you get that contact. And I'll tell you that we're going to have Dina come up and talk in a little bit, but she really puts out a lot of information on social media. And to be honest, that really is probably one of the fastest ways to get information is through social media. And I know some people have talked about the fact that they have spotty cell service and all that kind of stuff. But if you can get on social media, that feed is really fast. If you think about the last 2 fires we had in the community just over the summer, that information was out there like this, and people really who were paid attention to it and went to that source got that information. But in that level 1 evacuation, we want you to start thinking about, hey, getting on social media, whatever your avenue is to get information. We've talked to some of the radio groups, talk about maybe having some information put out there. We really don't have the best way really would be that social media. The other thing I want you to start thinking about at that level 1 is, do you have a phone tree or do you have a text group? One of the things I would encourage you to do is text is probably the fastest and most reliable way to get to person really quickly during these type of emergencies, is having a text chain set up. Because what that'll do is wait for that signal. If you might not be able to call somebody, but you can text them. And so having that tree, and I know when we talked to the Turk group, they talked about having a phone tree set up so that one person could communicate with maybe a half dozen of the other neighbors, and then they could communicate back and forth. The other thing to think about, if you haven't already prepared it, is to think about an out-of-state contact, someone that you can contact out of state that's kind of your home base. That was always a big deal with my family, is we always had a home base. So if we had some event happen, a lot of times we can't call person to person. You might not be able to call a person across the street, but often you can call a person out of state, which is odd to think about, but that really is an option. So in that level 1, I want you to start mentally getting prepared. I don't want we're not to the point yet. We're just giving you a warning that there's an event happening. Now, I know we focus really hard today on wildfire events, but remember, when we talk about disasters, be prepared for all hazards, right? Because we have several different types of hazards that could happen around here. We're probably too high up to worry about Lahar, but we have talked about the fact that there are volcanic eruptions, windstorms, all those things can create disaster events for us that really strain the 911 system and strain our ability to provide service. And so think about it, wildfire definitely, right? But one of the things about wildfires is it's semi-predictable, right? Traditionally, we have wildfires, in the fall during those red flag days. But those other disasters sometimes don't. They're a little bit faster sometimes. So just think about an all hazards approach when you're preparing. When you're preparing kits, we'll talk about what to put in them in a little bit. But when you're preparing those kits, think about it being all hazards. So then the next level, level 2, that just means set, right? We're at the ready phase. We already know that there's something going out there in the world that could cause us to have to evacuate. We're at that set phase, right? That's really when we really want to start thinking about voluntary evacuation, right? We want to start putting stuff in the car. We want to really start thinking about, I'm leaving my house. What is the things that I need, right, when I have to leave my house? When I talk about voluntary evacuations, if you have a place, start thinking about a place that you can go, maybe a family member, a loved one, somewhere maybe off the hill that you can start going. Because the next phase, when we get to level 3, that's really the go phase. That means we want you to grab your stuff and leave your house. Like Chief talked about, we lost a lot of acreage. We lost a few homes, right? We lost a few, things, but we didn't lose anybody. So that's the big thing, right? And when we get to level 3, we want you leaving and getting out of here. Now, the other thing to think about is depending on the fire, depending on how far it is in those earlier phases, you might also think about what we get to a place that we could kind of shelter in place. Because sometimes in that 1 and 2 phase, we want to start thinking about, is there a place that we can get to that might be a good spot for us to be, that might not be so close to the green belt or so close to other vegetation and stuff. So think about that. Show of hands. Who here has kit? Disaster, what's that? No, disaster preparedness kit. How many? 2 days. Can you live 2 days there? Right. Perfect. Good. So, what are the kind of important items to be in your kit? What do you think? Pills, medicines, water, right? What else? Food and clothing, right? Remember, again, clothing is not just for summer times. Think about blankets, think about coats, right? Because if this is a cold snap, if this is something that happens in the winter, you want to have that stuff available for you. But one of the things to think about is we always talk about this 48-hour rule. It might be a little bit longer, 48, 72, but think about what do you need? What are your needs that you need right now to have so that you can be self-sufficient? As a community up here, right, I'm sure that if you bound together, you can figure out how to be self-sufficient for quite a long time. I mean, you have a beautiful building that you could be at if you needed to be, right, if you couldn't get off the hill or needed to shelter in place. But think about those things in your disaster kit. All right. Wind-up radios are always good. Flashlights are always good. All those things are things that you should have in there. Basic set of tools, right? And then again, to just be able to communicate with each other, figuring out maybe two-way radios or some type of, once we get into a few days into a situation, we probably have the ability to maybe get ham radio up. Identify people who have generators, identify people who may have satellite service. A lot of people who RV may have sat antennas. They'll be able to do, that's a different way of getting communication rather than using phones, right? Maybe identify them, who they are. And those are things that I would have in my plan. But one thing about the plan is you definitely need to be flexible. You need to be able to be prepared, but not necessarily so specific, because you got to be able to change your plan as necessary, all right? So I'm going to turn it over to Dina now, and she's going to talk a little bit about, she is our Public Information Education Officer, and she's also a diva when it comes to social media.
Hello, my name is Dina, and I'm normally running around taking pictures of what's going on so I can post to our social media, but I was sitting right here, so I want to do a selfie. Can we do a selfie? Can we do a selfie? Can you guys be in our selfie? Come here, Chiefs. Will you guys be in our selfie? We'll take a picture so I can at least post that we were here. Hopefully we can get, maybe we need to not be right in front of the light. Let's go over here, maybe. Oh boy, hold on. Does that work? Okay, come on over. Let's see. Back here if you can. Are you in there, Chief?
I'll shoot over here.
No, I'll lower because I'm tall.
All right, there. I kind of got in here. There we go.
Oh.
All right.
Nice job.
All right. I will post that later, and then I'll have to explain why I didn't have a mask on. Getting information in a really big event is pretty important. before I start talking about that, I have been here addressing some of you and teaching some of you some classes. We've come and talked about fire extinguisher training. I think we've done an AED class in here and a hands-only CPR class as well. So I'm looking forward to getting back out here and re-engaging with you and having some time where we can gain those skills again. So we're getting close. Hopefully we can coordinate some of those trainings again in the future. They went really well, I think, in the past. We learned a lot at Sumner Grade Fire about getting information out. We've had a very robust social media platform, as both the chiefs have talked about, and we found that that was one of our main ways of communicating with you. But we want you to remember to always go to those reliable sources of information, that you will often see people on other pages posting information, but make sure you're going to the right places so that you're getting the facts. And we don't blow things bigger than they are or downplay them. So, I'm still looking at myself. Let's get my notes up here. We partner with our county agencies as well as our cities. So in an event like Sumner Grade Fire, we were very quickly dialed in with the city of Sumner, with the city of Bonnie Lake, the law enforcement agencies, Pierce County DEM, just to share information. And we dominoed our communication to you based on what we were communicating with each other. So make sure you're going to websites, like Pierce County's website. Our website, during the Sumner Grade Fire, we have an emergency banner at the top of our page that we can turn on, and it'll alert you right away. That's where you can get information on that event. Or we'll activate it in an excessive heat warning to give you cooling shelters, or in a windstorm to give you information about that. So it's not just for wildfire. We can activate that emergency page. We also had a link on our website that took you to daily updates on what was going on with the Sumner Grade Fire, mostly updating morning and afternoon updates and what happened throughout the day and where we were with evacuations and where we were with the status of the fire and the resources coming in. The counties also had that too. And we shared information with the Sumner Police Department and Bonnie Lake Police Department on evacuations. They would post on their social media, and then we would instantly share that information out so that it was very consistent and nobody was repeating or we were regurgitating what they were saying to make sure that the information you got was the same across the board from all of those outlets. Our primary outlets are Facebook and Twitter. We aren't doing any Instagram or anything right now, but our radio and television media, they very much follow our outlets. That's where they're getting information from. So we were rapid firing information on our large scale events to our radio outlets and our TV outlets. We were also doing interviews with them consistently to get them the updated information. We don't always monitor our social media pages, although I'm pretty quick. I'm pretty quick to reply. So if you guys are commenting or asking questions on our Facebook page or our Twitter page, I usually get a reply from me. Definitely to messages. If you send a direct message to our page, you'll get a reply there too. So I try to be very, very aware and reply to all the questions that happen. And if I don't have an answer, I'm talking to the chiefs, and I'm getting answers from our chiefs, and they're speaking through there too. In our large-scale events, we were predominantly doing 2 updates a day, a morning and an afternoon, with a bunch of fillers in the middle. And you'll notice too, like these last 2 fires we had over July and August that the chiefs were talking about, I would start a couple of main posts, and then I'd update on those posts, so you didn't have to go hunting all the time. So if you were subscribed to a particular post, I would update that post with the timestamp. And I was keeping it going whenever we had new information. So if you didn't see an update coming out, it's because we had no new information to share. We don't want to bombard you with frivolous stuff. We want the important stuff getting to you. And on social media, I now have been given permission to join, I've joined the 2 pages now, Chief, Residents of Tehaleh Facebook page and the Tehaleh Residents page. So we will share information there when we need. We don't want to abuse our ability to be in there. So when we have information to share, we'll put it out there too, but no, you can always share our information there. If we were in a really, really bad spot and power was out, we experienced that with Sumner Grade Fire. We know that not a lot of people had access to power, or their cell phones went down. I, for some reason, maintained my signal. I don't know how the rest of us didn't in our department. But if you were not able to get your information through those primary means of our website, through social media platforms, or news or radio, we will be creative about bringing information to you. So we would bring pop-up message centers to an area that is going to be designated as a gathering area to receive information. So we will bring information there. I hope that that day never happens, because that's going to be a really big event if that happens. But if it does, we will get creative in making sure that the places where people will pass through regularly or congregate, that we will have information there for you to learn from. Pierce County Alert. Did you talk about that, Chief? Pierce County Alert, if you have not subscribed to that, show of hands, anyone know what that is? No. Well, we'll talk about that too. So Pierce County Alert is a great tool for you to subscribe to. It is free. Pierce County Emergency Management manages that. You just have to register for it. You can register for PC Alert to get information via text or in your email or a phone call for things that happen in Pierce County that are significant. They don't abuse that. I can't even think of something I've gotten recently. I'm trying to think. You will not be bombarded in text messages. Please understand that. It's to get very critical emergency information out to you. There are some brochures at the back table that talk about, he's going to wave one up in the air, PC Alert. That's a little trifold brochure. If you go and register for it with the county, please make sure that you go back through and you update that information. If you move, they can't reach you. It's a text message or a phone call or an email-based system. So if you change your information or where you live, they can't get through to you. And I think that was one of the problems that we had during the Sumner Grade fire. They did activate the PC Alert, but some people had moved within Pierce County and they didn't update their systems, so they weren't getting the notifications. So you can choose to receive notifications based on where you live in Pierce County or where you work in Pierce County or both. So I, at one time, lived in Eatonville. I got notifications for Eatonville because I lived there, and I got my notifications for East Pierce because I lived here. I lived here too. I worked here, and I needed to know what was going on. So it's really helpful. So really take advantage of that. Pulse Point. Pulse Point. Anyone know what Pulse Point is? Anyone have that on their phone? That is also a free app that you can, well, PC Alert is not a free app. Pulse Point is a free app that you can download onto your phone. The intent of Pulse Point really was, at one point, is that anyone who learned CPR and was willing to step in and help somebody having a cardiac issue, you would register yourself on your app on your phone, download the app for free, let them know that I am CPR certified and willing to help. If we were at here in this facility and somebody ended up having a cardiac event and somebody called 911, and we have someone here having a heart attack, cardiac arrest, they will dispatch that in real time. You will also get a notification on your phone if you are registered and you have your app turned on that will say someone at the lodge is in need of some help with a cardiac arrest or a cardiac call. It will only tone out that information to a public place. Please know that it's not going to tone out an address to someone's home. You have to be in a public place and within reasonable walking distance. Here's an example. We were doing a PR event for Pulse Point when we were launching it a couple years ago at the South Hill Mall. Several fire departments got together. We were doing, had a film camera, we were doing interviews. We did a mock scenario where somebody had collapsed. It was an actor that had collapsed. They called 911. We told 911 that we were calling. They actually called 911. We told them that this was a training exercise, but we still went through the prompts. Somebody in the mall had the Pulse Point app. It dispatched on their phone, and they literally came running to help because it showed up on their phone. We didn't realize that it was going to go through on the Pulse Point app. So as long as you're in a public place and you're somewhat close to them, proximity, it will dispatch you to come help. Now, the other thing that you can use Pulse Point for is you want to know what's going on. Why did the sirens go past my house? We get that question a lot. Why is there a fire engine down the street, or why is there a medic unit, or what's going on? It's not really a law enforcement app, but you can see all of the calls going on without compromising anyone's privacy. So if it's a medical call, it'll just say medical call with a very vague proximity address, nothing exact. Fires, it'll give the actual address for fires. But you can kind of follow along and see what's going on with your calls in your neighborhood too. You can subscribe to your neighborhood, or it'll actually activate to other neighborhoods that you pass through, different jurisdictions you pass through. I think that was about it. We just want to make sure that you really go on to the really good, reliable resources to get your information. Share our posts when we put them out. We're updating them. We'll even update the content if we need, if something has changed in an actual post. And then as far as your kits that Chief was talking about, it's also a really good idea to have phone chargers in your kit. If you don't have extra ones, put those in your kit too, so you can keep your phones charged. And then you did talk about the hand-cranked radios. Having something that's hand-cranked that you can access those AM radio stations on will be really important. So, yep.
We thank you all, and especially for your service. Dina, you are familiar with social media, right? I was reading the minds of some of our audience, and they were thinking, what is Twitter? No, I know most of you are Twitter savvy, but it was very interesting to see how quickly word of the last fire spread just because of social media. So I think this last one we had, last two we had in the summer, a lot of people were alerted as a result of that. So I do encourage you to take care of that. Each of you, if you're not sitting on it, there was a handout, and that's there for you to take home to get any ideas. For instance, I added 2 things to my list of actions that we could take, and that was to join Firewise and to sign up for Pierce County Alert. So if you think of other things, go ahead and do that. And also, we want to answer questions, but we also want to get out on time. So if you do have a question or maybe a suggestion of a place that you would think we should put our efforts on, go ahead and fill that out, tear it off, leave it on the back table. We will have time for a few questions, but if we don't get to all the questions, we do promise that we'll get back to you in some other form to answer your questions. And speaking of questions, somebody in a brainstorming session thought about where would be the best place for everybody to meet up if there was a problem up here, and the consensus was Costco. They have everything we need. All right.
I forgot to mention the handouts that are on the back table. There's a lot of information back there that is a visual for what Chief Parkinson and Chief Mack talked about. Please take them, but there's also a QR code on a piece of paper back there that everything that's available on that back table that we brought, if you just aim your cell phone camera at that QR code, it'll take you to our website and you can print all of that stuff out, including the big packet of fire-resistant landscape plants. There's an awesome resource back there. If you didn't grab it at our last meetings, it goes from ground covers to trees to shrubs to everything, and it's not your standard old stuff that you see all the time. It's creative stuff. So please utilize that QR code to get those handouts.
Our next presentation is by Judy Hurley. Judy is the assistant to Councilman Dave Morell, who is our Pierce County Councilman in the 8th District. So, I'd love to.
Actually, yes. My name's Judy Hurley. I'm actually the assistant to Pierce County Council Member Dave Morell. He's District 1 that represents this area. And he wasn't able to be here, so I'm just here in his place. And don't really have a presentation, but so much great information by all of them that very little to add. But the one thing that some of you may be aware of, during the extreme heat, there was a lot of concern with the fireworks July 4th. And based on, they tried to do an emergency ordinance at the county council to try to do something to restrict the fireworks last year. And they weren't able to do anything. And another concern to that was if you change the ordinance at the county level, it takes a year to go into effect. So after we got past the 4th of July, Councilmember Morell worked with Councilmember Hitchens, and they did an ordinance to change the fireworks ordinance at the Pierce County level that covers the unincorporated Pierce County, which includes this area. So it will restrict the number of days down that fireworks can be discharged, and it will actually add a little bit more at New Year's. But the ordinance was passed effective November 1 of this year. So it won't have an impact on 4th of July next summer, but the next year. And the other thing that they included in that was the Pierce County Fire Marshal can use some measurements, and he can actually ban the fireworks if it's necessary. But it's pretty extreme. It's got to, it actually wouldn't have been able to been banned this last year. So it's some pretty extreme measurements, but so he did work to do that. And John had mentioned how you guys are working on different projects to be able to do them. We do know that part of the reason that you have so much issue with that is because the open space management plan here at Tehaleh. So we do know that Tehaleh, or Brookfield, has been working with a person at Planning and Public Works to try to do an update to that plan, to try to make it easier for everybody to do some of that without having to be questioned every time you want to do something. So we're hoping that that can get moved along pretty quickly. We don't have any updates to that, but I think Brookfield tries to be communicative about that, so with you. So we usually get our updates through Brookfield and Planning and Public Works. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Why aren't the residents of the area involved in that? And I was told a month ago that it was being submitted to the county 2 weeks ago.
I don't know that specific answer, but the person at Planning and Public Works, it is a process because it does take quite a long time to do that update. But I can leave some of his cards back there, and you're welcome to send me an email, and I can send that question along directly to the person and include you in it at Planning and Public Works to try to get an answer for you. Mm-hmm.
And I've introduced her before, but I'll introduce her again, Eleanor Trenary, Outreach Representative for Representative Kim Schrier. So would you have any comments for us, Eleanor, please?
Hi, not trip over my chair. I'm Eleanor. I'm with Congresswoman Schrier's office. She covers this area as part of the 8th District. We also go all the way over the Cascades, including Ellensburg, Clay Ellen, Wenatchee, Chelan. So our office is pretty familiar with wildfire, but not so much on this part of our district. We work really closely with the state DNR, with our local fire districts, and with our federal partners to monitor fire activity in our district during the season and get feedback on where we can be most supportive through legislative work in DC. I will also just mention, and I hope that none of you ever need this service from us, but we can assist constituents with federal agencies. So in the event when constituents in our district have needed, for example, to file FEMA assistance claims, after an event, we can assist with that as well and make sure that you're getting, what you're owed. And again, I hope none of you ever need that help from us in the future. But please know that we're here to understand your feedback, understand your concerns, work really closely with our partners in the community, and make sure that Congresswoman Schrier is serving your best interests in DC. So I'm available if you have specific questions after.
And again, we appreciate that she did come out and talk to us, and we saw that effort. All right. One of the final things we wanted to cover before we get to questions was the future, what we're doing currently and what we're looking for. And I'm going to turn it back to John Sharp. And one of the things we wanted to call your attention to is this is the current map, but doesn't have the two new additions. So you can see there's just a lot of territory, and John has posted some of the future projects on there so we can find out about those. So I will turn it back to John.
Future projects all hinge upon approval, which we don't have yet. So these are hopeful future projects, okay? So we kind of got to keep that in mind. Each project, each time we come up with something we want to do, we have to get specific. We have to put together a specific proposal, exactly what we want to do, how we intend to do it, and submit it to the TOA Board of Directors, and they review it. They're very willing to work with us. They are also all very worried about insurance issues and liability issues. If I drag Jerry out there to cut blackberries and he falls down the well, is Stacy going to sue him? You know, I mean, and it's a legitimate issue. So, I mean, you got to understand where they're coming from as landowners, or they're not really the landowner, they're the manager of the land. So we go back to all of Trilogy, and this is all 855 homes. This is the homes in the very far down left, lower left corner have already started to sell those lots out. I think that the last lot or the last home will probably be occupied in March of 23. And we contrast that back to Sherry Custer, who was our very first resident, 854 homes earlier, in February of 13, I believe. So it's been a 10-year process building this out. The entire community of Tehaleh, 9,700 homes, should be finished in 2031. So we're only, it's really coming upon us. So the few projects that we've talked about, like I said, I look at things in my area, Roger looks at things in his area. So you're kind of guilty because you drive by it every day and you see it and it stands out. And this is a little area in Mount Shuckson down just kind of northwest of the Reflection Park, where, by the way, our horseshoe pits are almost complete in Reflection Park. These top two photos a year and a half ago, there was nothing there but grass. And those are now blackberries that are approaching 10 to 12 feet tall. And it would not take too long to clear that out. You know, a good group of volunteers could probably clear it out in a day, day and a half, and nurse their wounds for a week or two afterwards, because it's somewhat brutal working with blackberries. Newland has been very receptive to removal of blackberries, thistle, any invasive species. And if you go back to the environmental impact statement, it says that they must work towards removal of invasive species. So that's one of the reasons they're allowing us to do that kind of work, because it actually benefits them in the long run. This is kind of a fire hazard zone here. And Chief Parkinson might be excited to learn that his new fire station is going to be right on the right end, right at the top left corner or right corner of that picture. So I'm hoping that maybe they'll help get the lumber out of there before they decide to build the fire station. Actually, the tract G that is in red belongs to TOA. The tract right above it, tract H, that belongs to the future fire or water tower project for Tacoma Water. And then just above that will be the new fire station, which exciting news on the timeline for that. What was the timeline? Next? Breaking ground by the end of next year. So that's very exciting news. This is another area where I drive by it every day and I look at it and I go, God, that looks terrible. It's a corner of 181st, one of the main entries into Shuckson and St. Helens. So a lot of people look at this and go, wow, how can we be proud of that corner? The Mount Hood trailheads, Leslie and her little gang on October 2nd, cleanup day, attacked a lot of this trailhead, but they unfortunately left all this vetch and thistle behind. So it's still a future project that needs to be attacked. And this is, nobody knows what that is. That's the berm in Shuckson. And I have been told by Shay that it's an open project and changes are coming. That's all I've been told. We did have a very successful cleanup day on October 2nd of this year. And we had 65. What did we allow? 75. We allowed 75. We ended up with like 80 turnout. And these are the people out doing their thing, enjoying the day. And at the end of the day, we were treated to a really nice lunch at the lodge here. And Shay paid for half the lunch, and the Whitman Homeowners Association paid for the other half. And these are the guys that are just out tackling and having a good time. You see, they're all smiling. Look at Gary smiling in that one. The dumpster started getting full. It started getting challenging to get the debris into it. Pat here, he was a real trooper. He tromped around in blackberries all afternoon. And then we got fed afterwards. One more group of people, I missed them. That was up in my neighborhood. And then we all got to go down to the lodge afterwards and enjoy a really good hamburger or hot dog. Beautiful sunny afternoon, the sky was blue, everybody was having a good time. And we really probably didn't make a huge difference to the fire load that day, but we had 75, 80 homeowners out there working together, smiling and laughing, and it really brings the community together these kind of days, because a lot of people go, why should we be taking care of the trailheads? We pay to do that. Well, do we want to up our dues and keep paying more, or do we want to have fun and do some little events like this occasionally? So there's the end of the day. 20-yard dumpster filled a little bit past the brim. We were a little bit worried if they would even come pick it up, but they did. So, and at that, I'm going to give it back to Ron, and we'll go for future projects. Questions?
Okay. The reason I'm standing here is because I want to be on camera and to have the microphone for that. We already received one question. I'm not sure who to direct this to. Maybe this might be, since it's a state question, why won't the Washington State Insurance Board approve or allow USAA to give us a Firewise discount on our homeowners insurance like 8 other states, Oregon, California, other ones? Does anyone have an answer to that one? So, in other words, there's a Firewise discount in other states, but not in the state of Washington.
I don't have an answer specifically to that question. I wish I did. What I can offer, though, is that the Commissioner of Public Lands, Hillary France, is very aware of that issue, and it is something that she has been working on. And so I hope that sometime in the not-too-distant future that will actually change.
John, I received a notification from my insurance company, and it sounds like they're going to try to make sure to keep the losses down in forested areas. And one of the things that they are going to provide is to put fire gel at the base of my house. Are you familiar with that product at all? It's supposed to be a fire prevention.
So short answer is no. I got a notification similar to that for my house. It basically said, it went a little bit beyond that, but it said your insurance company may basically come cut down a bunch of trees and prep your house during a wildfire. You can opt out of this if you want, but if you don't reply, basically you're opted into the program, and in return we give you a discount. So I guess what I would say is, my opinion would be, at the end of the day, is for me it was the right decision to say, yeah, that's what I would want to happen. I'd rather lose some trees and have something sprayed at the base of my house and keep my house standing. That's my view on it. So I wish I had more information. I just don't on that subject.
We have an insurance policy with PEMCO, and PEMCO said that they have their own, for a wildfire in our neighborhood, that they would come bring their own firefighters. Have you heard of that?
So short answer would be no. I don't doubt that there's parts of the country that, and you'll see, I want to say is NBC or ABC. One of their top stories right now is on basically, private communities buying their own used fire engines and difficult. This happens in Eastern Washington, where you see, just small communities end up buying a used fire engines or something like that. So I don't doubt that there's contract groups for targeted areas. We do not see that here, and I would not expect to see it on a fire locally.
Did anyone else receive that notification from their insurance company regarding somebody come out to the house, inspect it, as well as the gel? You did? What insurance company are you with? Safeco. Okay, we are with Safeco, and I heard from a friend, Butch, he also received that too. So it's probably something we do need to take up with the HOA, first of all, because we don't want to damage the houses, but it didn't sound like it was going to be immediate, but something probably within the next year that Safeco is going to do. And I can understand why, because they probably have high claims and want to keep the costs down. So they're helping us. It's just the one item I had a question about was that fireproof gel.
But they would be having to go up into the development, for like our house, we're up against the tree line, so they would have to go onto Whitman property and knock trees down.
Yes, there's a lot of unknowns about that, but just stay tuned. We'll do some investigation and see if we can find out. Paul, you had a question?
Thanks. It's really great to see you guys come out and help us with it. If you're in emergency planning, which I am, I'm one of the block coordinators for Shuckson, and if you're in fire prevention, you'll realize you got to tolerate ambiguity, okay? Because there's a lot of different answers we get, but here's one I have for you. Turt Central, our emergency planning people, haven't really convinced me that evacuation is probably not going to work with 2,500 cars coming down into that now under construction bottleneck on 198th. So we're telling people to ride out at least 10 to 14 days of food and water, because we're going to probably have to ride out most things up here, which I've come to be a believer in. The other thing is, the second part of that question is, does Brookfield have a legal obligation to build that second road? And when will they do it? Because we keep hearing the date from 2024, 2026. What's your take on that?
Answer that in reverse order. Dan, I'm not the developer, so you can't boo or throw something at me. So the road is, and I'm giving you my opinion here, is specifically timed based on your developer's a for-profit company, right? That's a very expensive road to build to drop down on the Ording Valley Highway. They do have a cutoff with the county, and it's around 4,200. There's a really odd number, but it's basically around 4,200 homes. You add around 475 homes a year right now, and you're almost exactly 1,500 homes away from hitting that mark of where the county will no longer issue building permits out here. That road also takes 3 years to build. They're doing some final condemnation of some properties to be able to acquire all the property that they need down the road. The long story short is, if Brookfield wants to continue making money, again, they're a for-profit company, that's what they're doing. For them to continue doing that means they have to start on that road right away. So what my short answer for you is, I know that they are ready to pull the trigger on it. They were waiting on, last time I talked to Scott Jones, they had like 1 or 2 properties left that they had to acquire between here and the highway. So I think because just for the business reason, whether they want to or not, they have to build that road, and they have to start very soon. So the first part of your question had to do with evacuations. And so number one, professional advice: if you're told to evacuate, evacuate. Don't follow personal opinion of, it's going to get too bottlenecked. If you try to evacuate and it's too bottlenecked, then yes, you should have a backup plan of where you can defend in place locally. And there's a ton of clear area in the middle of the neighborhood. But as Chief Mack talked about, as you start to hear those warnings in the area, if you hear us say level 1 and you hear that over the news and they're talking about the Bonnie Lake area, anywhere in this area, that should make your ears perk up. It might not be near here, but it should make you say, wow, I don't hear that too often, and start paying attention to the news. If it's near you, start getting your kit together, start loading your car up. If you know that it's close, take that option that you have when it's your option to say, hey, I'm going to leave now before the traffic bottlenecks, before all this other stuff happens. Maybe I'll just go out to dinner in Tacoma and call it good, and hopefully it blows over. But leave early. You can watch all the things with hurricanes and everything else where you say, why didn't those people leave earlier? And there's probably a million reasons why, but when you have the option to leave and leave before you're forced to leave. So. Yes.
So I'm glad to hear that you do have an evacuation route planned. I guess I give two things some consideration to the chief's point. Different people evacuate at different rates of speed too. And so if you've got animals, if you need some extra time for somebody that needs assistance, you definitely want to give some thought to providing a buffer to that. That's real important. The other thing is with an evacuation route, think about it as defensible space too. So what, as you choose your projects, think about making sure that evacuation route is going to buy you a little bit of time too from a fire, for example, so that you're dealing with fuel mitigation around it. That's something that we're seeing more and more around the country, actually, and we've all learned a lesson from what's happened in California, where folks are trying to evacuate and couldn't get out.
Are there any other questions? Okay.
My question's for John Sharp. On behalf of those of us who are new to Trilogy, could you please explain, just clarify the blue areas on that map? It sounds like one party owns them, another party manages them, and are we not members of the Tehaleh Owners Association and the Whitman Community Association? My opinion is that the directors of those nonprofit associations have a duty of care to act on behalf of their members. And so kudos to the old goats and the volunteer efforts. And we've lived in areas before where there were heavy volunteer efforts around these kinds of things. But why are these groups not a partner in initiating efforts to address these threats? I'm frankly confused. So could you please clarify these questions of who has control over these lands and what exactly is the issue? Why is there some difficulty in getting cooperation on these things?
Everything in blue on there is owned by Tehaleh Owners Association. The Whitman Community Association, which is Trilogy, is a sub-association to TOA. The TOA Board of Directors is 100% controlled by Brookfield Newland at this time. And they have been from day one, and they will be for probably another 8 to 10 years. I have no idea what that timeline is like. They are very specifically following the county guidelines that were drawn up in 1998 when Cascadia was developed. They've actually improved the guidelines. In 1998, there was never going to be a road down to Ording. They were going to build a road to Falling Waters, which was later abandoned. And the county said you can build a big circular loop with the one entry in and one entry out, and that's it. Newland Brookfield came back and said later in another amendment, we would like to have the second road. We're willing to help pay for it. So Newland gets a lot of heat, our developer gets a lot of heat, but if you really go back and you read the history and you understand what's been going on up here, it took them 15 years to break even, and they're just now breaking even, and they're planning on making money in the next 10 or 12 years. But they also know that the big development over on 188th Hill, if you walk down at the end of that road, they've cleared out all that land all the way to Prairie Ridge. There's 1,550 homes going in there, and only about a third of them can be built before that road connects to Ording. So Brookfield Newland has 100% of the responsibility of paying for the new road. They've got the money sitting in the bank. They're waiting for county approval to start. And if you go down by the wastewater treatment plant, I think you'll find that, I believe in my mind, they've already started on the areas where they own both sides of the road. Because they've paved all the way to the wastewater treatment plant, and the road kind of just disappears out of sight now. And I don't walk it. I'm very careful not to go into their construction zones, because I've been very diligent about respecting their construction zones, because that is one of the reasons that they have been willing to work with me, is because I'm willing to respect what they have, and they're willing to respect what we want. So they want the road to be built. They need the road to be built. They look out for our community. I really believe that. But they're looking out, yes, they're looking out for dollar too. You got to expect it. Pierce County has to love what Newland Brookfield's doing. How many millions of dollars a year in taxes is this community generating? Right now, we're generating hundreds and hundreds of construction jobs out here that these guys are paying money, you know, they're eating in Tehaleh, they're buying food. You know, it's a major undertaking, this project. And I said at the county hearing 2 years ago, and the commissioner that was doing this hearing said, I was there in 1998 when we started, and I'm getting ready to retire. I'll probably never see the end of this thing. I mean, it's going to be a 35-year project in the making. So, you know, we can badmouth them, but I prefer to try to work with them because they've been very open to discussion. They've been open to my projects. They've been open to allowing us to do more. They realize that we're free labor. They realize that we're not going to go away, that we got certified as Firewise. They realize that we got certified. We're now recognized 501c3, whatever, nonprofit, so we can accept donations. Again, our goal there is to talk people like Alan and the county and Schrier's office to say, hey, we can get you some grant money. You know, here's some money. You can take that to Brookfield Newland and say, can we hire a forester to come in and clean up this area over here? That's where we're really headed. And another place I'm really headed is of the 855 homes, 61% touch the blue. So 61% of the homeowners in Trilogy usually have an issue with the blue zone unless nobody can see their backyard from a trail or anything, and they're probably already cleaned it up a little bit and said, okay, I'm going to risk the $500 fine, I'm going to go clean it. I don't condone that. The best thing to do is to talk, you know, let's go to Newland and say, hey, I got a problem behind my house. I've got 3 homeowners in Mount Adams that Newland gave them permission. Newland hired a company to come in, removed all the blackberries behind the 3 homes, hauled them out. The following year, they gave those 3 homeowners permission to continue to spray the blackberries and keep them down as long as they didn't find them growing pumpkins and acorns back there. Don't make it into your yard. Make it into a natural forest. Keep the invasives out, and we'll work with you. That's where we're headed, and we just need to keep the mindset. Toe the line, don't step over the line, try to keep them working with us, and ultimately, we're all going to benefit in the long run.
Time for just 2 more questions so we can end on time. Again, if you don't get your questions answered, write it down. We'll make sure that we answer it publicly so that everybody knows your questions. Okay?
Thank you. I'd like the fire chief to tell us how important Proposition 1 is to our future Fire Station 117 in Tehaleh. From my perspective, luckily we passed last year that we do have a fire station coming in the fall of next year, but as of now, it'll be an empty fire station unless it gets staffing. Is that correct?
So thank you for asking that question. I'll give the quick version of what Prop 1 is, and if you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you want to talk to me afterwards, if you want to talk about Washington tax law, we can probably spend the rest of the year talking about it and how we're limited. So what Proposition 1 is asking for is to reset our current regular levy, what we also call our fire levy, to the statutory limit. So the state allows us to collect $1.50 per thousand of assessed value of a home. Right now, that's at $1.36. We're asking that to be reset. We asked the same of you 4 years prior, so from 2018 through 2022, the same request was in place. Back in August, you voted on 2 issues. One was then Proposition 1, which was the EMS levy. That was renewed, and so thank you all for that. That was vital to get that one renewed. The second one picks up 3/4 of our tax revenue, so it is truly what funds our daily operations. So if approved, what that does right now, and I realize that this example I'm about to use might not apply to anybody, but it's the example that I have in my head at the moment. On a $450,000 home, that would increase your tax bill $525 a month, or the equivalent of $63 per year. If you took a $900,000 home, it would be double that on each of those, so $126 a year or $1,250 per month if you split it out to say what does that look like to you. So the question a little further on the fire station, so we did move it forward in the construction process. It was going to be our last station built. Construction, just like everything else, has hit a screeching halt because of the demand for construction right now. Trying to get things through permit has been horribly slow. Our station in Edgewood that we just broke ground on last month took us a year in permits. So that's why we advanced this one up, because of how quickly Tehaleh's growing with Wesley Homes in now. We've already seen a doubling of the call volume that we used to see out here. So we've got the funding because of a voter-approved bond to build the fire station. So again, thank you. That was approved at the end of 2017, for the funding to build the fire station. Your developer pays a voluntary mitigation fee to us, which will help offset some of the cost of the equipment. So right now they've committed about enough to buy us half the fire engine, so we have to come up with the other half of that money. But then the last one comes with staffing. For us to staff that station 24/7 takes quite a bit of money. We also have a similar need in the city of Milton right now with adding additional staff in there. Understand you're a part of a regional fire department system. So just because you have, even if you had a fire station in Tehaleh, doesn't mean that that's the only place that serves. But as we staff more stations, what that gives you is what we call reliability. And reliability is the measure of how often when I call 911 do I get my closest fire station. Well, I would assume most people would say, I want the closest one. Most people don't say, oh no, send me the one that's furthest away. And so that's what our commissioners are asking, and that's what was put out on the ballot. Was to reset that levy. It allows us to keep pace with growth, and growth like we're seeing in Tehaleh, what we're seeing in Milton, to try and make sure that our services match up with what we're seeing in the community. Quick blurb about how we're governed. We are not part of Pierce County, even though it says East Pierce. And I just say that so as far as our governance, the elected officials for Pierce County, they don't really have a connection to us. We work with them. I partner with Dave Morell. I talked with him last night at a meeting. He calls me once a month to check in. We get along great, but our money does not come from the county. It doesn't come from the state. So we're our own taxing authority, and so we are funded by the citizens of East Pierce Fire and Rescue, those boundaries that I spoke about earlier. So every bit of funding that we get comes from you in the form of taxes, and then outside of that we get some additional money that comes from insurance companies when we transport people to the hospital. As far as residents, you never receive a bill. We bill your insurance company. What they pay, we collect. Any excess is written off against that EMS levy. So complex issue here. One of the most confusing parts, and I'll close on this one as it relates to taxes, where people get confused is they see that tax assessment show up in the mailbox, usually late June, early July, and it shows that the value of your home continues to climb year over year over year over year. And what most people assume then is that, well, that must mean the fire department or the schools or anybody else is getting more and more money. That's not the way the tax system works in Washington. Around 20 years ago, Initiative 747 limited the amount of money that we can, the tax increase that we can apply each year to 1%. So even though your value goes up, what we're allowed to collect is 1% above what we were the prior year. So our population grows at a rate far greater than 1%. Our emergency calls each year grow at a rate faster than that. Everything about our operation, 1% doesn't quite keep up with what the demand is. So what that levy reset does is it allows us to try and keep up with demand. So again, I know that's a confusing statement, and I threw a bunch of stuff out there. If there's more information that I can provide you, please come see me after the meeting. We also have a bunch of frequently asked questions on our website. Dina also puts stuff on social media almost every day answering different questions about what Prop 1 is, but thank you for that question.
So you saw there's things we can do. It takes a community. Firewise is about community. The Trail Club is about community. And of course the landscaping group also helps us as well. So by working together, by understanding what we're trying to do to keep ourselves safe, keep our neighbors safe, it's all up to each of us to do our contribution. And on that handout, I've given you some action items, things that you can do. You can contribute, you can join, you can be involved in the cleanup. There's just a whole lot of things, so it doesn't require a whole lot of time. I do want to thank you, and the entire team wants to thank you for spending 2 hours of your very busy day to learn more. But the more that you know, the more that you can be safe. And of course, I'd like to give a round of applause to all our panelists and to the Firewise community. So as you leave, just remember we're in it together, and enjoy the last sunshine before July 15th. Thank you for being here.